Okay, next we're going to talk about drum overhead miking, stereo and mono. If you have one mic, you want to use it as kind of a general overall kit microphone, and mono overhead could be a great choice for that. So let's start using just one microphone and look at a couple different examples of where to place that in front of the kit or directly overhead, and then we'll get into some stereo mic techniques. So if I have one microphone, I'm going to want to capture the entire drum kit evenly, and keep in mind that assuming that all the drums have the same volume, and that will depend on the drummer and the tuning, we want to have that microphone kind of equidistant from each of them to start. And the farther away you get, the more averaged out that becomes. But then you can use the microphone placement, like we were talking about before, to kind of mix these different elements. So imagine the mic is right on top of the snare drum, you're gonna get plenty of snare and not much of anything else. If it's right in front of the kick, you'll get mostly kick and not much of anything else. For overhead, you can choose where to put your mic based on which drum you want to hear the most, or if you want to hear the overall kit sound. So my first placement is going to be basically just audience perspective, very simple, capturing the entirety of the kit. Now there's some limitations using one microphone. So if you have a kick mic, that's something to keep in mind. We'll get plenty of low end coming out from the kick into that microphone. And in that case, we don't need to worry about getting any of the kick from our overhead. If we literally have one microphone, you want to come back a good amount so that you get some of the low end from the kick, you get in front of the resonant head of the kick, plus the rest of the drums. So that's a challenge, and you can try out a bunch of different locations for the mic for that. Okay, so this placement, we're kind of getting a nice average of all of the drums. It's far enough away that the sound can develop. We're not isolating any drum in particular, and here's what it sounds like. You'll notice that because it's far enough away, I'm starting to get some room sound, which can be great for a drum recording. Okay, so great sound. You might be surprised that you're hearing each of the drums pretty clearly. If I had this more directly on top of everything and closer, we start to lose a little bit of the air and a little bit of the sound, and it doesn't sound like a natural drum kit quite as much. So keep in mind, if you start getting overwhelmed or confused by mic placement, just think about where would I be standing in the room, and if I was standing there, what would I hear? You're putting a microphone this close to a snare drum. It's kind of like putting your ear right next to it in a lot of ways, with a lot more capacity for sound, obviously. But if you want to have a really good miking technique for overhead or for room mics, think about like where you would want to be standing in the room, and you can even use your ears as a guide for that placement. And when I say that, I mean literally when you're miking something, you can plug one ear and use the other ear and get as close or as far away from whatever your sound source is to find how close you want to get to it. So this is a new mic placement. This is more of a traditional overhead for mono mic placement. And my goal with this and my approach is to try and get the microphone equidistant from all the drums. And I always think about the kick and the snare as being the center of the kit, and not physically, but those two are the foundation of the kit. So those two are the most important. So I have the mic pointing directly at those two and centered on those. Because this is closer to the drums in general, and it's not far away pointing at the back of the kit, we're going to get a lot more attack and a lot less room. So the sounds are a little bit more on axis for the microphone. Things are closer. It should sound a little bit more controlled, but still get some of that airiness and washiness from an overhead mic. You can hear that things sound a little bit more controlled. I would say a little bit less natural, but it's not a bad thing. Everything feels tighter, everything feels closer. So great mic technique here. This is a great option. Okay, so let's talk about different height options. So the higher you go from the tops of the drums is how I think of things. The more room sound you're gonna get, the less attack and the less warmth. So depending on the volume of the drummer and the style, you may wanna back off a little bit, you may wanna bring it in a little bit closer. This is a good distance away. Let's see what it sounds like and listen to how much room tone comes through in the recording. Okay, so this is obviously a very extreme difference, but I want to show you how drastic of a difference there can be from just height on the overheads. Basically the same position and the same angle of the microphone. So listen to how this sounds. Should be much less room, much more controlled. We're going to get a lot more snare because we're almost starting to get, we're going to get a lot more snare because of the distance to the snare. It's higher than the kick drum and directly over it. So listen to what it sounds like. Right, so a lot more attack, a lot more richness, a lot more fullness. If this was my only mic, I'd be more happy with the placement here. If I had microphones on each of the drums, I would want my overhead to be much farther away, capturing more of the airiness, washiness, and room sound. Next, we're going to talk about stereo mic techniques, and one thing that I want to bring up so that you know about this, there are only a few true stereo mic techniques, and they have to do with the distance between the microphones and how those microphones interact. Sounds traveling to the right microphone versus the left microphone, and the difference in time and spacing is what makes it true stereo. It's the same way our ears work. If a sound approaches and enters our left ear sooner than our right ear, we interpret that sound as coming from our left. So if microphones start to become too far apart from each other, farther than basically the width of our head or maybe a little bit wider, we would consider those separate microphones, miking two different parts of the same instrument. Okay, so one approach to miking with overheads, we're looking at the whole kit as one unit, and I'm going to go about the same height on both microphones, and I'm just trying to average out the left and the right. So this is mostly for cymbals and washiness. This is not a true stereo technique because they're too far apart from each other, but we will get separation from the left side of the kit and the right side of the kit, so it's nice to pan them left and right. It's a nice imaging still. So one thing you'll notice is as I'm moving to the left side of the kit, we'll hear more of this microphone because it's closer, and on the right side of the kit, we'll hear more of this microphone. It's nice to pan them left and right. It's a nice overall view of the drum kit. It's not true stereo. We're going to explore those a little bit later. All right, this is a cool technique. This is the Glenn Johns miking technique. What we're going for here is two microphones equidistant from the snare drum, which is something that you'll commonly see for different overhead techniques. The reason for that is when two mics are equidistant from the same sound source, that will put that sound source centered in the stereo image. So we're going for a centered snare on here. I'm using my drumsticks to measure. It's a good tool if you need it. And one is directly over the snare, pointing straight down to the center, and one is kind of over the drummer's right shoulder or over the floor tom, pointing at the center of the snare also. So slightly different sound than our last mic technique. Check this out. So for me, it's a much wider sound. It's more controlled, it's contained. It's also cool because it's drummer's perspective, specifically with this microphone being from behind the kit, not something that you see commonly. So great option also. Just remember that both mics are equidistant from the snare drum, and you can experiment with specific placements also. So here we have an awesome option for stereo overhead miking, and this is true stereo because the mics are close enough together, they emulate the way our ears work. This is called XY, and this is a great option for a couple of reasons. One of them is this is a near coincident pair, which means that the mic capsules are very close together. That could mean that in post-production, this mix is mono compatible because you're not going super wide with your stereo image. Another reason I like XY is because you can choose which element of the drum kit you want to have basically centered or the most prominent in the mix. And what I like to go for is basically a mix between the kick drum and the snare, having the XY pair above the two of those and capturing the image of the kit. One thing I want to mention about stereo miking is the reason for doing this is to capture the image of the drum kit. So you may not want this in every situation. For pop music, you may just want full control over the different elements, the kick and the snare and the individual cymbals. For stereo miking, we want to make it feel like the drums are in front of us, almost like it's a picture, almost like you can see the image of the drums. So true stereo miking techniques, like the ones where the mics are close enough, that's what we're going for with those. This is another example of a great overhead stereo miking technique. This is a spaced pair. The distance between the microphones will determine how wide your stereo image is in your final product. If you start to go too wide, you'll start to lose that stereo image. So you want to stay, I always go about like a head's width distance and maybe a little bit more if you want to widen it. So listen to the difference between this and the XY that we just listened to. One more cool overhead stereo miking technique is ORTF. This is a slightly wider stereo image, and one thing to consider is with near coincident pairs, we have the microphones in the same location, and so there's more bass frequencies because of the positioning of the microphones. For wider stereo miking like this, we actually lose a little bit of bass frequency. So keep that in mind. This is a great option if you have all the other drums mic'd, and great option in general, but you may lose a little bit of that punch, a little bit of that middle clarity and middle bass frequency.